It's showing I'm live.
Okay, we're still waiting.
Just my Facebook sent me a message that said that it's on live.
Okay, let me try to, there we go. It bounces back and forth. Well, welcome everybody. I believe we're live and thank you for joining us this evening. So tonight we're talking about the RCAF USA Board of Directors plan, which is called the Cattle Industry Long Range Plan. The plan was launched on December 16th of 2020, and each week thereafter, we've held a Facebook Live on Wednesday evening to talk about some of the details of the plan. And specifically what we've done is after the launching, for each of the next 3 Facebook Lives, we talked about 2 of the 6 strategies that were designed to actually fulfill or implement the core objectives of the plan. So tonight is the final episode. It's part 4 in the 4-part series of talking specifically about the details of the plan. And with us this evening are some of our newer board members for RCAF USA. We have a total of 13 board members from across the United States. And so with us again tonight is George Wishon from Washington, and he represents the region of Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. And then we have a director back again from Ohio, David Hyde, and he represents Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee, and West Virginia. And then we have back again this evening, Mike Jones, who's a rancher down in Arkansas, Louisiana, or excuse me, he's in Arkansas, but he covers Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. So we've got a wide swath across the United States to specifically talk about how this plan impacts the individual cattle farmer or rancher. And so we're going to begin by going over the 4 points of the plan. So the first objective is to grow both domestic and export demand for beef that is specifically produced from USA born and raised cattle. In other words, build demand for a USA beef product in order to increase demand for the cattle produced by these farmers and ranchers that are here tonight, as well as all of you who are listening tonight. And so we're going to talk about that one first, and that is growing beef demand for USA produced beef. And one of the interesting facts is that we've looked at USDA data and see that we have been importing about 40,000 head of slaughter-ready cattle per month from Canada throughout 2020, total of about 487,000 head of live cattle. And recall that that was happening while U.S. producers could not get a bid for their cattle. So George Wishon, you're up on the northern part of the United States. You see the trucks coming down. So talk about how this plan affects your operation, your community, your neighbors, as well as the future and the longevity of this industry, the U.S. cattle industry. So what are your thoughts on how important this is to you?
Well, I think this is a plan that keeps the independent cattle producers, sustainable and being able to plan for the future and being able to continue on in a profitable standpoint. There's a lot of our communities that rely heavily off of ranching income, and a lot of our business is done with our suppliers in small rural communities, and that keeps the rural communities alive. As for talking about demand for USA beef, we have very good demand for beef within the United States, and as you mentioned, our exports have been up. So really, that makes the question: then why is the domestic cattle prices so low? Well, that comes from the imported both live cattle and beef coming in. And so we see a lot of it coming in, and that's direct competition against our domestic live cattle that are getting ready for processing here in the United States. And so, I mean, it's straight up competition that can be used to wiggle around our domestic cattle markets for when packers need live cattle, and when they don't, they can fill up those gaps pretty quick with imported non-differentiated beef here in the United States. I think the way that we can really boost demand for American beef is to just do that. Call it American beef, call it USA born, raised, harvested beef. We need a labeling program that to where your everyday consumer can easily differentiate, and we need an advertising program that will, call an ace and a spade, and say this is beef that is born, raised, harvested here in the United States, not from, just anywheres. And so that's kind of the main thing. We see the live cattle coming into the United States. We see them coming into a processing plants and competing and driving our domestic markets down. And so that right there is really hurting our small rural communities, because that's just taking less and less money out of cattle producers' hands, and that's taking money out of our suppliers' hands also.
So quick question, over the past 10 years, do you have more producers or fewer producers in your community in Eastern Washington?
I've seen a lot of producers, go out of business one way or another. A lot of them get older, or, nobody else kind of comes in to fill their places. It's tougher and tougher to be in the business financially because, the amount of profitability is lean. So I think we see less and less cattle out on the countrysides because, the demand for actual American cattle is, lesser because of a high amount of imported beef.
Okay, well, thanks. So David Hyde from Ohio. So same question. We've got a core objective of growing beef demand for exclusively USA produced beef for the purpose of pulling, increasing and creating demand for your USA cattle. So how does this affect your individual operation and your community?
Well, I have a little bit different take on it, being over here in the Rust Belt. And I retired after 35 years as a construction electrician, and I've worked up and down this valley on every steel mill there was. But back in the 70s, cheaper steel came in here and flooded the market, and the steel prices went down, and the steel mills started closing the doors. And it's just like the cattle industry and the beef industry, the cheaper imports have flooded us to the point where we can't make a living out here anymore. Well, something happened here in 2018, President Trump, he initiated the 201 tariffs for security reasons. And just like a light switch, these small steel mills started gaining popularity again. And I think that's where MCool would come in and save all of us cattle producers here, not only in Ohio, but across the entire United States.
Okay, so same thing. In your area, have you seen an exodus of producers, or do you see that your industry is thriving and growing in Ohio, the cattle industry?
No, what I've actually seen is there's a lot of producers that have went out of business, but the gap's been filled by the larger guys getting a little bit bigger. There's no rental ground available for pastures because somebody leaves. There's always somebody in the wings to pick it up, and it's usually the bigger guy. But smaller producers, no, they're going out.
Okay. And so they're going out at a time that we have record exports. We have, in fact, since October, we've had some of the highest monthly volume of exports. And that's what we've been told as an industry we need to pursue. So record exports, strong beef demand, consumers paying record prices for beef. Should our industry be growing, or should it be shrinking in terms of the numbers of producers that we have?
Oh, it definitely should be growing, but everything you just said there, it doesn't make any sense to the cow-calf producers over here. I mean, markets don't mean a thing in Ohio. Let's put it that way. We have no markets. It's right. Pretty bad.
Okay. So Mike Jones in Arkansas, again, The issue is, whether we should distinguish the superior USA product so we can put a born, raised, and slaughtered label on beef. And the purpose, of course, would be to create demand for the cattle that you produce in Arkansas. And so how do you think that's going to affect you and your community and the future of your cattle industry there?
Well, I'll tell you what, Bill, we're seeing the same thing that Georgia's seeing from Canada as we're seeing coming out of Mexico, bringing these cheap cattle, low quality cattle in and trying to put some weight on them and put them through the feedlots and cutting them up and putting them in packages and calling them processed in the USA. And they're not the quality of beef that we have and we need and American people want. But we see the same thing coming in from our south border. I think two things that just really stand out to me. I'm not, the most educated guy in the world, but it's pretty plain to see that mandatory country of origin labeling would differentiate our cattle and let the people in America have USA beef, born, raised, harvested here, and just get that quality that they're looking for. And if we don't get something done to grow ourselves and use them cool, and right along with that, you step off into this beef checkoff that we've all been trying to get something done with. If we had the beef checkoff and it was working for our farmers and ranchers in the USA, we wouldn't be having, we wouldn't be asking for a checkoff vote, but it's not working for us. If it was working for us, we would see higher priced cattle, more profitable cattle on the ranch instead of at the grocery store. I get people every day. So I know y'all are doing really well. I just paid $6 for some hamburger meat. The disconnect of the education of the consumers is so far apart from what the ranchers are making and what the grocery stores are getting with the feedlot or the feed packer profitability is just horrendous. And it doesn't take a whole lot to look at that and just see the difference. We're seeing, you asked the second question, well, how's your, you guys growing? Or every day we have a weekly sale barn here about 7 miles south of me. And those guys are getting further and further out in the country trying to find people to bring cattle to the local sales because there's just no cattle left here. It's not profitable. They're planting the ground in trees. They're doing anything they can do but raise cattle. So you see those 30, 40 head deals that, there used to be in my county, there's probably 300 people that own cattle. I bet it's down to less than 50 in the last 10 years.
Really? And so over the past 10 years, as we've seen cattle prices declining, at least since 2015, we saw that inexplicable collapse in cattle prices. What's the rest of the industry done to address it, whether short term or long time? Have you seen any positive actions in that respect?
Well, I haven't seen anybody stand up and say, "Hey, we got problems. We need help." Anybody but us, RCAF, and that's one of the reasons that I joined RCAF years, back in 2016, is I thought, well, they're the only people that's doing anything for us as ranchers, and that's a scary deal. It's time for everybody that has cattle to stand up and try and do something for your product and your country and your own place. And I just think people don't realize what's happening. They're putting their head in the sand and, well, it'll get better later. Well, later is now. So
right.
We have to continue to grow and fight for our industry. And it's scary to see how many of us will be here in another 10 years if we don't utilize this plan that RCAF has came up with.
Right. And speak about your rural communities, your rural Main Street. What's happening in your area down there in Arkansas?
You're seeing these small communities in my county where we live. You're seeing the small towns kind of dry up. Now we have a Tyson poultry processing plant. We have a lot of poultry houses in this area. But you're seeing those jobs between Tyson, Walmart, and a few other places is all the jobs that are left. And you're seeing the small town stores on the main streets kind of close shop and go away. Because those 300 guys that were buying feed or hardware or cars, trucks, tractors, they're not here anymore.
Right, right. So David and George, what about the rural communities in your areas? What's happening? What's been happening for the past decade or longer?
Mine's kind of like what Mike was just elaborating on there. And if a piece of property comes up for sale, it seems like we're getting more sportsmen people that's coming out and buying them. And people are moving into the city and closer to where the work is, but it's not good.
Okay. George, in your area in Eastern Washington?
Oh, I think there's a lot of that. The same thing, you know. There's a lot of people that had farming operations and had, you know, 50, 100 head of cattle, along with their whatever their, you know, tillage operations, along with that, and they don't have cattle anymore. You know, they're strictly a row crop or grains or whatever. They don't have cattle like they once did, and you know, there's a lot less smaller guys that don't have cattle, and so you know, there's still a lot of the small towns are going away, but the amount of businesses that specifically cater to more of your cattle industries have really kind of, you know, dried up, and there's not near as many you know, specific ranch suppliers in Eastern Washington as there once were. And so, you know, that's kind of to be along with that. You know, there's just less cattle and less, you know, economic demand. And I think there's a lot of, you know, smaller communities that, you know, are kind of drying up. You know, there's not near as many of the small towns as there once were.
And that's an important point, because that was a consideration in the development of this plan, and that is that the cattle industry is the single largest segment of American agriculture. We have cattle in every state of the union. And so if there is a desire to revitalize rural America, it's your industry that we need to start with, because your industry touches more communities and more people than any other agricultural industry in the United States. And yet we're left with what's, you know, you've described, and that is consumers paying these record prices and thinking you're doing extremely well, when in fact your prices are completely disconnected. So that brings us then to the next core portion of the plan, the objective, and that is to improve cattle sector profitability. Right now, the beef industry is doing quite well, but cattle producers are experiencing this tremendous collapse in cattle prices. And even when all of the market fundamentals appear to be perfect for driving cattle prices up, cattle prices yet remain in the basement. And so, of course, what this plan recommends is to restore competition as the means of restoring profitability. And the proposal that we support specifically in the plan is the Senator Grassley and Tester bill to require the packers to increase competition by purchasing at least 50% of their product from the competitive cash market. So how does this fit into your overall, the needs of your individual operations? If we had more competition in the industry and the prices were more responsive to what consumers were paying in the grocery store, how is this going to affect your operations? So George, let's start with you. What would restoring competition to that ultra thin cash market do to your operation?
Well, what I believe that would do is, you know, it put the pressure on our large packers to participate more in the cash trade in the market, and so that'd really help out, you know, the next level in the cattle supply chain is your feeders, and that'd help out your smaller farmer feeders, the guys that don't have the big time contracts, that are the smaller ones that like to compete for good quality in these sale barns across the U.S. It helps out that level of the cattle industry. And, you know, those are the people that buy the feeder calves, and they need the help to keep that competition going, because if they have more demand for their finished cattle, they have more demand for feeder cattle. And so that helps bring up the demand, that helps bring up the price, and just brings up the competition to where it isn't being drove down and down and down more and more, so the packer can just keep on lessening their input costs.
Okay, good. Well, and you live up there close to some major feeding operations because you've got a Tyson plant up there in the Pasco, Washington area. So you're relatively close to the feeders and you can see them. But Mike, is that the case down in Arkansas? Do you have many of the feedlots? And so you'd probably be far removed from that cash market where the packers are actually procuring their fed cattle needs, but yet as a cow-calf producer, how does that affect you?
You know, we are probably northwestern Oklahoma, western Texas. There are some feedlots and some processing plants, but you know, here as cow-calf producers, I'm going to say 70% of the guys in Arkansas are cow-calf producers, but you're seeing those fade. But we understand that if those cattle don't bring good money coming out of that feedlot, they're not going to pay us anything for them. And I know it's coming when guys like me, you know, roll out and are gone. You know, that's quite a few calves. Well, they got to get those calves from somewhere. And this is not a business where you can just, okay, I'm going to be a rancher today and we're going to go buy some cattle and some equipment, some ground. That don't happen. So there's sure a disconnect between what those live cattle and the live cattle are pretty tough. I don't carry cattle to the rail. I don't carry them I sell my calves weighing 5 and 6 weight. We just don't have the feed readily available to get them on up to those weights, and so we move our cattle on west. So they go to a feed. You know, there's somebody at that Oklahoma City stockyard. They're buying our cattle and taking them to a feed yard somewhere, and
right.
So
like
I said, we're a pretty good way, but we feel it all the way down here.
Right. So as a cow-calf producer, you're at the foundation of the U.S. cattle industry, and it's the most populated segment of the live cattle supply chain, but you're far removed from that packer purchasing the fed animal. So what do your neighbors understand how that works and how this might assist you? Or do you think there might be some disconnect or educational needs there as well?
I think there's a lot of educational needs there. I think the only guys that really understand are the pretty good sized operators that have grown their business. And the bad thing about it is we've grown it off guys that have quit. And, you know, those 30, 40 head guys that quit, well, we pick that ground up and keep trying. And like I was saying before I got on the Zoom deal today, you know, I've been concentrating on making my interest payments and equipment payments and all that, and not being able to really focus on anything else because it's so tough. But I think there's still a lot of disconnect or educational experience that guys just don't understand. A lot of the guys that are still in the deal in this area, they've got a 40-hour week job in town and they're growing 20 or 30 calves and they just haul them to the sale barn. They don't, you know, whatever they bring is just cash money for them. And so that makes things harder to try and manage some profitability on our end because the market, the cattle get dumped on it. And then when you bring them in from out of the country, those carcasses at 30, 40 cents, it's really hard to compete.
Yep. So Dave, in Ohio, you've watched what happened on the August 19th Tyson fire in 2019. And then we had the COVID pandemic in March of 2020 is when that began. And soon thereafter is when Senator Grassley introduced the spot market protection bill to require packers to purchase 50%, at least 50% of their needs from that competitive cash market. So that was back in May of 2020, and the industry fought back, said that we don't want the government involved in our industry. We're going to solve this on our own, self-correction. And here we are in January, and you've got prices that are still where they were at 10 years ago. And you have, again, record exports. We have consumers paying near record prices for beef. And so what's going on? What do you say to producers who don't yet understand or who have not yet shown any support for restoring competition to that cash market?
First of all, I'd have to tell the producers, you're going to have to decide on who you're going to listen to. And just like you said, they was going to come up, the industry people was going to come up with their own plan, and they did. It was some kind of ingenious 75% of something plan. And last week I heard on the radio that they reported that they got their plan together, except the Packers weren't on board. Well, and then we go out to October, and 17 state affiliates broke away from that same industry because they didn't want that 75%. And then last week, you had the dietary guidelines come out, which the same industry people was supposed to be out there plugging along for us with the checkoff money. And you see where that got us, absolutely nowhere. And they say that they have a voice. Well, who's listening to them? Because nobody's listening to them. But back to this 50-14, I think the biggest thing I take on this 50-14 is it takes away their captive supply to 14 days. 14 days is nothing. I mean, if a bunch of feedlots got together and say, hey, fellas, we're going to hold these cattle for, 28 days, you're going to put the choke point on the Packers instead of the Packers putting the choke point on us.
So in the fat cattle market, we see tremendous volatility, and we have since 2015. I mean, you've got price swings that we've never seen before in the industry, just wild swings in the industry. So how many times a year do you sell cattle, David?
About once in the fall.
And Mike, how many times do you market cattle?
Just in the fall. Actually, I've retained ownership at a feedlot for some of them, and then try to sell them out for freezer beef, or if not, they just go to the sale barn up here. Our closest major packer is approximately 300 miles away. That's why you don't see too many feedlots here in Eastern Ohio.
Okay. So Mike, how many times a year do you market cattle?
Normally twice a year. We have a spring and a fall calving season for us, just to try and spread some of the income out.
Okay, so what has this volatility done to your ability to make decisions regarding when to sell?
Well, one of the things, we've held cattle longer than we should have. We've spent more money on feed to try and get them to a higher price. We've been guilty of selling cattle too soon, lighter weight, just to hit a market that, and it's made it. And no matter what decision you make, some days you're like, we should have kept them longer. We should have not kept them as long. Spreading that calving situation out to a couple times a year is mitigated very little, because that was my point, to try and mitigate some of my profit, or get my profitability up, because I can maybe hit the markets better. But I can't judge it. And the guys have been in it longer than I have. They're the same way. They can't judge it. So it doesn't really. We're hoping the 50-14, like Dave was saying, if they got 14 days, when you're killing 500 head a day, that don't take long. And so we're hoping, with the support of 50-14, that we can get some downdraft from that, so these calves can go.
Right. So George, you're a cow-calf producer as well. When do you typically market cattle?
We calve in spring, and then we sell, well, right at the same time we're calving also. And so just kind of, spread it out over a couple of months. So it makes the whole marketing stability is kind of interesting, because you're wondering, well, is this the week I should send some into a barn or try to market them private treaty, or should I hold off till the next week? I mean, you can see some pretty major market swings in the course of 2 to 3 weeks, and so it just makes it kind of wild to wonder, should I wait, should I go, or should I went 2 weeks ago? And so that could be 10 cents a pound difference over the course of a month, say. Right, so that can just make financial planning a little bit interesting.
So Mike alluded to it. So how does a plan like what you put together, and that is a long-range plan that's going to create a demand for your cattle and increase competition in the industry, what do you think that will do to the current volatile market situation that we have today? Will it help it over the long term?
I think it will, because it basically more or less with the 50-14 proposal, it gives a really strong baseline that the Packers will be participating at a 50% level consistently throughout the year. I mean, granted, there's going to be some seasonal ebbs and flows just because of the way the American people like to eat beef, but it'll make the big swings of where, a major packer will be in the cash market for, 3 weeks a month and then be out of it for 3 weeks a month. It'll take those types of market activities out and to where they're participating in cash purchase of fat cattle consistently throughout the year.
Okay, good.
And so that's where I think the market stability will come from, or it should drastically improve the market stability.
Okay. And David, same question. How do you think this plan will impact as we go forward? How the market is just wild in many instances with inexplicable downturns.
I think it's going to take the highs and the lows off of it, to be honest with you. I mean, when everybody going into the game knows what the rules are this time, you know, they got to buy 50% of their cattle off negotiated trade and 14 days to kill. I mean, and then if we have mandatory price reporting and have the numbers out there, we can actually see what's going on. And I think a lot of guys like me, Mike, and George there, we can do a lot more financial planning to our benefit instead of the Packers' benefit.
Right, good. Mike, anything to add to that?
You know, I think that with this plan, regardless of this 50-14 or some of the other points that we made on this this plan, is we're right there trying to keep the farmers and ranchers with cattle in business. I mean, that's what it kind of boils down to. And when these guys can't control that market in the 30-day process, you know, down to 14, I think it really gives us a point to go to, you know.
You bet. Good, good. So let's jump now to the third of the four objectives. And the third one, the board was really intent upon getting it at the forefront of this plan. And that is to intensify the efforts to preserve and protect the liberties and freedoms of cattle producers so they themselves can assess the competitive forces in the marketplace and then based on their personal assessment, decide how they're going to run their operations, as opposed to being told that you have to, for example, that you will by 2023 have to begin putting a RFID ear tag in every animal if you want to ship cattle across state lines. That's the current effort on the part of USDA to impose a mandatory RFID requirement for all adult cattle shipped across state lines. And now RCAF is the only cattle association that opposes that effort. In fact, we're litigating it. So talk about why it's important for you as an independent cow-calf producer. Why is it important for you to be able to make your own choices and decisions about how to raise your cattle, market your cattle, and essentially, you know, meet the production standards that you want to meet? And Mike, I was directing to you.
Okay. You know, with this RFID, you're talking about this cattle having to cross state line. We ship cattle to Texas. We ship cattle to Oklahoma. We don't want that. This is another added expense for us to take care of and keep up with. And I don't think there's any producer out there that wants to be told how they're going to feed their cattle or what they're going to raise or what bull they're going to use. And it goes back to, I'm going to say, just the independent liberty, justice, and freedoms of the United States that I should be able to run my operation like I want to if I'm paying the bills. And every turn you make, there's some USDA or somebody that's trying to put us in this I'm going to call it a ditch where everybody does the same thing and they get more control and we lose control of our own business.
Okay, good. So David, talk about the control aspects of the RFID proposal, the mandate.
Well, first I want to echo everything that Mike said there. And on this RFID tag, I've talked to a lot of neighbors, and if it comes down to that, they're out of business. They are just not going to put them tags in there. You made a comment that we were the only ones that are against it, but I've talked to a lot of sale barn owners, and I've seen a lot on YouTube here, and they're against it too. They don't want these extra mandates coming down, you know, where they got to keep records, we got to keep records. and it's just like the BQA program. It started out to be a good thing. Now here in Ohio, if you take cattle to the sale and if you don't have that BQA certificate, you get docked. It's not a premium, it's a deduction. And they're trying to take control of the whole segment is all they're trying to do. I don't care. Somebody wants to do natural, organic, CAB, whatever, that's fine. Just don't try to shove it down my throat to make me make what you want to make.
Okay. And George, what about you in Washington?
I think the mandatory RFID is a big problem. Like Mike, we're shipping cattle to other states. For us, it's Oregon and Idaho. We're consistently selling into those markets. And the RFID issue is, another strain. A lot of states, that's going to be an issue with their banks vaccination programs and the RFIDs. The retention isn't quite there as, say, a steel bright tag, and there's more cost, and it'll also add a lot more problems in our own record keeping, a new record keeping program. And if you start looking at it and you start going into all the premise ID stuff, all of a sudden you're going to see a lot more issues if you're grazing leased land or if you're also grazing on state or federal land like us. So there's more issues that come up, and a lot more expense, a lot more burden, and then all of a sudden, and nobody wants to lose any pasture and grazing ability. And so when you start looking at those aspects, it pretty quickly looks upset.
Well, answer the basic question, because you've got groups out there that are trying to force these mandates upon you. They want you to provide written grazing management plans for how you're going to rotate your pastures. Tell me how you get that done if you don't have the government or the big corporate interests telling you how to do it. What's your motivating factor?
Well, we here at RCAF believe that our membership does a good job at being in the cattle industry. And, there's amount of self-liberties. What I do on my operation with my parents is we know what's best for our own operation just because over the time of experience. Now, compared that to a lot of other operations, the management styles are probably varying greatly because, the geographics require different. There's different people's styles of management. And, if it all works out in the end, it all works out in the end. Everybody knows what's best for their own operation because, well, everything depends on a whole lot of other stuff. And so we're confident that the individual liberty needs to be there so that producers can make the decisions for their own operations that suit their own operations, because nobody knows how to run cattle on a particular piece of land like the people that are doing it. And so that's kind of one of the things that we look at. And so that's kind of how I feel about, needing help. And, there's other organizations that may say other things, but if somebody's telling you to do something, eventually it'll get worse and worse. And you'll see a lot more control from, sometimes some very large organizations.
Okay, good. So, Mike, what motivates you if you don't have the government or the corporate interest telling you how to raise your cattle? How do you know how to raise your cattle? What motivates you?
Bill, I come from a long line of people that push cattle across grass. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to take care of my ground. Because if I don't take care of my ground, I can't grow grass. If I can't grow grass, I can't grow cattle. And I want them cattle to be as healthy as they can be to gain as many pounds as they can gain, because that's how I get paid, is what they weigh. And the quality of materials and the meat and everything that those cattle are, we look for the best quality bulls. We cull the cows that have problem feet. I mean, there's all kind of management styles. Dave Hyde has his own in Ohio. George has his and out west. But I think as a rancher, I stand for all the ones that I know that we're all trying to do what's best for our cattle and what's best for our ground, whether it's environmental, health, because that's why we stay in business. We don't take care of our ground, our cattle, we're kicking rocks down the street. And I think that's what a lot of people that want American quality beef that's born, raised, and harvested here believe that. They believe that, and I don't know what my local consumers do. We hear it all the time. So I think the guys that are left in the cattle industry right now are really trying to take care and do a good job with their cattle and their ground. And we don't need somebody from some environmental group or some big corporation telling us that our numbers don't match theirs and that we need to do it a certain way.
Okay, good.
And I think all cattle producers feel that same way.
Yeah. Dave, do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm the first generation cattle guy. I'm not like Mike. I don't know everything. But, you know, I've learned real quick. I don't need anybody watching me because I got enough neighbors watching me. And if you do something wrong, they're going to let you know real quick. And a story I heard the other day is the kid down the road, he was going to put in some chicken barns. And to be neighborly about it, he went around and told everybody he was putting in chicken barns. Well, about 2 days after that, he started getting letters from attorneys that you're not putting in chicken barns. And that's just another infringement on his right, and that's what the RFID tags are to me. They're just an infringement on my right.
And so Mike raised the issue that it's an added production cost. And at a time where, would you say that your calf prices are returning your cost of production today?
No, we're probably 20%, 20 cents a pound, maybe 30 from where we can break even on the books.
Dave, you're shaking your head, yes?
No, I'm with Mike on that one. We're probably 25, 30 cents to where we can break even here too. And a year like this, when there's a lot of guys looking for hay up here, and it's not cheap. Luckily, I got enough, but some of these guys are going to be hurting pretty bad.
George, what about you? Are you getting your production costs in the marketplace?
Well, right now, every dollar counts in a market like this. And so it's pretty tight times. And so, yeah, we don't need an extra, increased cost from a government program.
Okay. And would you
go ahead? I'm going to say, Bill, I mean, there's a huge disconnect, like I said earlier in the night when we talked about consumers thinking that, they're paying $6 a pound in the grocery store and we're not even making enough to break even on the ranch. And I mean, we've got to educate the people about that disconnect. And so this plan will help do that.
Okay. So that raises a question even before we get to the final point. So the question is so you've got a plan, and it's been distributed through the industry. We've seen it in the trade publications have been covering it. We've been working it for 5 weeks on Facebook Live and doing other events and trying to create awareness for the plan. But what do we do with the plan? How do we put that plan into effect? And what would you say to that, Mike? What do your fellow cattle producers need to do with this plan so we can do what you've said, and that is restore for you the opportunity to be profitable in your industry when the consumers are paying, they're demonstrating they're willing to pay record prices for beef. We have strong beef demand. This should not be happening. The plan addresses it. How do we turn that plan into action?
I'm going to say right off the bat, one of the very first things that you need to do as a producer, if you're not already a member of RCAF, you need to be a member so we have a voice, so we can go to Congress and we can go to our state and local levels and say, we have this voice. We need to change this. We need to help our farmers and ranchers. I want to say that's number one, join RCAF. Number two is get your head out of the sand and go participate in some of these programs to revamp the checkoff and call legislators and say, hey, we want 5014, we want mandatory cool. I think you got to wear those guys out at the legislative branches, whether it's your senators and congressmen. You got to call. You got to make the call. The time for somebody else is going to take care of it is over. This is the time that we have to stand up as producers and help ourselves because nobody's going to do it. So, that's kind of where I'm at. We have a plan, but we all have to participate and push that plan.
Right. So Dave, comments on that?
I agree with Mike here. And we also got to get people like the breed associations, the AI companies and marketing associations on board too. They have everything to benefit, nothing to lose from this plan. And back to what Mike was saying about call your legislators, don't be afraid to call, because I'm going to tell you what, 90% of the calls you make, it's going to go to a voicemail. Just have written out what you want to say. Like, I want to support the 5014, which is Senate Bill 3693. and leave a message, and then call back next week, and then call back the week after that too. Just like Mike says, we got to hound these people, until they get the message.
Okay. George, what about you in Washington?
Well, I can kind of say the same things, be a member of RCAF so that we can speak for you and you can speak for us. Along with that, we have various state and county affiliates. They need the memberships like we do. And then, to kind of echo right along is as a producer, we all need to be in conversations with our elected leadership. And, this plan kind of gives some, pretty easy ideas to tell those guys what we need to help keep our industry afloat. And that's a big part of their representation, is making sure, the various industries are in good health. And so that kind of, says that we can support certain things. All of our membership needs to be talking to their elected levels. And then the next thing we need to be working on is sending this along to our different elected officials. To kind of add on to what Mike and Dave said, our suppliers, the industry, it'd be great if those guys could be in support of this plan too, because there's a lot of other businesses that rely on a healthy cattle industry to stay alive also.
So you're suggesting get some of the local businesses to get on board and do some lobbying on our behalf, on the producers' behalf. Pick up the phone and let your local feed store and equipment manufacturer and salesman, let them understand what's happening in the industry so they can help be part of the solution. Good. So let's jump to the last of the 4 core points. And the last one was really caused, or the impetus behind it was the events that happened in August of 2019, when we saw a huge disruption from a single plant that shut down temporarily. And then when the COVID pandemic hit for the first time in memory, and consumers went to the grocery stores and could not buy the beef that they needed for their families. And so that had become a very important part of this plan to ensure that that never happens again, that the US consumer who will, under the plan, be afforded the opportunity to support the US cattle producer with a country of origin label on the beef. And in return, the US cattle producer wants to ensure that that consumer never runs out of beef again, as it has. So that's a very important point in this plan, is we want to work in order to serve the interests of the consumers of the beef products that are produced from your cattle. So speak on that. What does that tell you when the United States, major grocery stores across the United States suddenly can't keep the beef case full?
Well, I want to tell you that.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I want to start out by saying, a lot of people, well, the meat's meat, and people don't really care. Well, I think we got that petition, that mandatory country of origin labeling petition, that's got 400,000 plus signatures, and I promise you, a lot of those are consumers, and they want to know where their food comes from. They want high quality American beef. We have to continue to elevate that and bring in that quality beef and be able to keep our farmers and ranchers in business. I think it's such an important part of our culture as well as our high quality food product that we produce.
Right. Good. So David?
I think we need to get more packing plants. That's a number one right there. I know that Mike was saying a little bit ago that consumers are paying over $6 a pound for ground beef. I can sell $6 a pound ground beef every day, but I can't get a steer in to get butchered anywhere. We talked about this earlier, and we're out to 2022 for waiting times, and that's part of the problem. And a lot of other things that bother me is on the food security and safety end of it. I mean, people don't realize that Mexico just had 50 people sickened here this last fall by clenbuterol, I believe it was. And I mean, they're supposed to have the same regulatory that we have. Now, how did that happen? We need stricter rules before that meat enters this country.
And importantly, the plan addresses that very issue, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So good. So George, comment on the assuring the consumer of an uninterrupted supply of high quality USA beef.
Well, to kind of add on that is we need more processing facilities. We don't have enough. We don't have enough smaller and regional operations. We've grown to be reliant on some of the mega meat packers, I think, quite a bit. We need more of your smaller and regional meat packers, because this spring kind of showed it. The grocery stores ran out, and people were trying to call up all types of local ranchers, local processors to try to buy beef that way. RCAF started out a website to help fill that niche. And so that's kind of a thing that I can see there's a lot of connection, is getting more smaller processors in business, and then making sure that any imported beef meets a high standard when it comes into the U.S., and then making sure that the United States public knows that beef that's born, raised, slaughtered here in the United States is safe and healthy. And so those are the kind of main things that I'd say.
Great. So we've gone through all four of the core issues. There's no requirement that we go for a full hour. So let's consider wrap up. Let's go around the horn and see if there's anyone that has some final comments, and then we'll let the good folks that are watching go and read the plan. So I'm sorry, David, we'll start with you. Wrap up.
I think producers out there, they're going to have to decide on who they're going to go with. And here's one outfit here, the NCBA, their lobbying report for last year, over $90,000. Number one issue, to prevent the implementation of MCOOL. This fall, the Federal Trade Commission, they had a signature or comment period about made in USA. And this was entirely on beef coming into this country, being unpackaged, repackaged, and stamped with the USA label. Here's the NCBA and the North American Meat Institute, both against that. Producers, we just come off 4 years of Make America Great Again. It appears to me that one organization didn't get the message.
Okay. So George?
Well, I'd say just, kind of same thing. This plan is basically what RCAF stands for. This is an accumulation of what we think this industry needs to survive for the next years coming. And this plan was meant for the everyday cattle producers out there to read, to understand, and support. And so, if you like this plan and you're not a member, by all means, please become a member of RCAF USA. This plan is what we think is a roadmap to keep us going forward. And this plan was meant to be read by producers. So if you read this, share this with your friends and neighbors that are also in the cattle industry. And so that's kind of what I have to say. Become a member with RCAF. This is what we stand for. And so if you think this is right, join us and let us represent us and help us represent all of ourselves in the industry.
Thank you. And Mike, final comments to your fellow cattle producers.
Well, I think this plan, it was written by cattle producers that go out there and check them cattle and feed them cattle every day. Not written by some New York lawyer. It's a plan that everybody can understand, and it's a plan for grassroots people to get on board and go along, and let's keep our ranches and our history alive with our families and the ranching industry. By all means, if you're not a member, go to our website, RCAF USA, check out what we are. Don't take it on somebody other group's word that we're whatever we are. Go decide for yourself. I'm standing here every day trying to raise cattle and a family and provide a good, safe product for American consumer, as well as everybody else that is a member of RCAF. This plan will lead us down the path to keep our future going for the industry. I'm just imploring you to look at it for yourself, decide for yourself, It's good common sense. It's not hard to understand. It's a plan that we can all work with, work by, and stand for at the end of the day.
Great. So David Hyde, George Wishon, and Mike Jones, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And for everybody out there, thanks for spending time with us. And please heed the advice of your fellow cattle producers. With that, God bless and good night.
Good night.
All right.